breathed just fine, and everything else about them was fine, but it just went really, really cold all of a sudden. And the car just was zooming. He said the Carmelo was the name of the guy who was driving the car at the time, and he, like an older guy, rarely drives faster than 50 miles an hour, but he just, like, they were just going like a bullet straight through the middle of the city. So the other thing that happened while they were there, they said this really odd, unfamiliar music, they described it as, started playing through the tape deck, the radio, as they were driving through, and they said they couldn't make out what kind of music it was. It was very strange. It wasn't coming from my cassette, so I guess he had like a little, tape deck in there. It was very soft music. I'd never heard it before. And so they both, like, started freaking out at this point. And as they're, like, shooting through the city, all of a sudden, boom, it vanished around them. And they're back on the street again. And they feel, all of a sudden, bang, 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 the street underneath their wheels, and they're back on the road.
Whoa.
And for some reason, they were... They said they hadn't been in this zone for like 10, 15 minutes. And they were many, many kilometers away, apparently, when they, like, discovered where they were afterwards. And they had this, like, huge chunk of time that they had apparently, like, jumped through space and time and ended up in many kilometers away. So anyway, that was kind of their story, and they came back and told whoever would believe them at the time. Both men were, like, just shell-shocked by this whole thing. They would... it was pretty traumatic for them, I guess. They're older guys, kind of Argentinian guys who'd never really experienced this before, just kind of wound up in this zone all of a sudden and found themselves many kilometers away from where they first started.
Well, I mean, we know that missing time can be very weird, and now that sounds interdimensional, but that sounds like it also could be an implanted memory, or that's not really what happened, that's what they remember. And that something different actually happened, because that sounds such a sterile, weird world. Like, what exists there? That's dreamlike. It feels like more of an implanted memory than from an abduction scenario than they just happen to slip into another dimension, which is my worst fear, by the way, is slipping suddenly into another dimension. So, I don't know. I'd love to know if other people in the area saw a UFO that day. I'd like to know more of that story.
Right. Yeah, well, apparently at the big... Sorry, go for it, Melissa.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, apparently at the beginning of this, as they were driving onto the interstate on this on-ramp, this truck apparently came out of nowhere, past them, and going super fast. And as the truck passed, it kind of slowed down in front of them, almost like it was like trying to slow them down or trying to direct them. And as it slowed down... Carmelo, the guy who was driving the car, he said it almost made his car kind of slow down and match the car in front's speed, which was kind of odd. Even though he never took his foot off the gas pedal, he felt that this truck that pulled in front of him all of a sudden was guiding them and controlling their speed, which is kind of curious, to say the least.
Yeah,
so it might line up with a screen memory that could have been a UFO that kind of they perceived at the time as a truck or whatever, screen memory wise, and then was fucking with them.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, like they also, this was 1978, and maybe they just didn't feel comfortable telling other versions of that story. Like maybe they did see something. Maybe there was more, like they're just talking about human things, but maybe they saw something that they just didn't want to say.
Yeah, which is the truth in all the stories. As we know from the Netflix and the UFO show on Netflix, the best parts are usually left out, especially the people who are nervous to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the other story I have, it's pretty brief, but it was just wacky enough where I'm like, what the fuck is happening here? And so I have to tell you guys.
Okay.
So it involves a Dr. Carrie Mullis, and this guy was like really qualified, accomplished biochemist. He came up with, in '83, a technique to amplify parts of DNA molecule. Whatever. He just found some like amazing shit that kind
It's
of
so
revolutionized.
smart you can't even describe
Yeah,
it.
like it's
There's a whole lot of stuff here that was like, oh, that's pretty fascinating, but I don't want to read it right now. But he like revolutionized the fields of biochemistry, molecular
He was wicked
biology.
smart.
He was
Yeah,
wicked smart.
this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Medicine and crime scene forensics, and won a Nobel Prize in '93. So really accomplished dude.
shit.
So anyway, this guy was brilliant, but apparently not without his eccentricities. So apparently he was a big fan of the LSDs.
Ooh.
So he liked to trip balls,
All
this
right.
fella. He was often described as the cross between Hunter S. Thompson and Stephen Hawking, which is an odd mix,
that is an odd mix.
but I'm on board for that.
So he's double an asshole?
Good one. Yeah, nice. So anyway, Mullis wrote this book. It was a memoir, and he called it Dancing Naked in the Minefield, published in 1998. And among a bunch of the stories in his memoir, including his love of LSD and his, scientific observations and all this other stuff, there was a chapter kind of buried in there called No Aliens Allowed, which outlines the time this world-renowned scientist had an encounter with a glowing alien raccoon. Stay with me.
Ooh.
What?
Stay with me, guys. Yeah.
Wait,
So 1985
this is not a dark
is the
story.
year.
This is okay. All right.
No,
1985.
this one gets kind of silly, but it's kind of, it's weird at the same time. So it's silly and weird. So 1985, when Mullis was staying at this cabin he owned in the sort of a remote wilderness in California. So he would often go to this place and just kind of, take it easy and, take weekends off here. It was like their little family place that he would go to all the time. So he arrived at this place at like midnight one night and came into the cabin, opened it up, turned the lights on, had a bunch of groceries for the weekend. He was there, dropped them off on the kitchen counter, and then had to take a piss, as you do after a road trip, and then had sort of walked out. There was an outhouse that was kind of down the hill a little ways from the cabin, which you had to go to relieve thyself. It was about 50 feet away. So he walked down the hill towards his cabin, but he would never actually get to the outhouse because his attention was suddenly captured by something strange out in the trees. And here's what he described happened during the time. He says, I walked down the steps, turned right, and at the far end of the path under a fir tree, there was something glowing. I pointed my flashlight at it. It only made it wither where the beam had landed. It seemed to be a raccoon. It wasn't frightened. Later I wondered if it could have been a hologram projected from God knows where. The raccoon spoke to him, and it said, "Good evening, Doctor." And it said, and he said something back. He doesn't remember probably what it was.
He's so
but
polite.
just- I know.
No,
It was
I
a
was
lovely
expecting the
little guy.
raccoon from the Avengers. I was expecting a foul-mouthed raccoon.
Rocket's in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's more bad mouth. This thing was very polite. And then he thinks he said something along the lines of hello back to it. Then he says, the next thing I remember, it was early in the morning. I was walking along the road uphill from my house. And what went through my head as I walked towards my house was, what the hell am I doing here? He had no memory of the night before. And he thought maybe he'd passed out and spent the night outside. But the nights there in the summer in this California region, was super damp. Obviously dew and all that sort of stuff, very humid. And he said his clothes were dry and they weren't dirty at all. So he doesn't know where he just woke up sort of walking. Came back into consciousness walking along this road.
So
he
how
doesn't
many
know if he
hours had
slept
passed?
So he was there at midnight and woke up sometime in the morning when the sun was up. So I don't know. He said he'd lost about 6 hours. And he had no idea where he had been. So his flashlight that he'd taken was gone. He couldn't find it anywhere. He looked all over the place, back down at the outhouse, couldn't find it, nothing. So he made his way back to his cabin, and for some reason, all the groceries that he'd brought and put on the kitchen counter were just strewn all over the shop. They were all over the fucking counter, all over the kitchen. They were just all over, like someone had scattered all his groceries everywhere.
Like a
Almost like they
raccoon
were
got into it?
Yeah, fucking raccoons, I swear to God. I have to deal with those little bastards all the time. Anyway, we won't get into that. But, so So the back of the cabin, all the lights were still on. So he hadn't gone back to the cabin apparently, as well as the groceries being out. And when searching he was like, "What the fuck just happened?" So then he started searching the property to try and like find out like what is going on here. And there was this one particular spot that he liked on the property. He doesn't describe where it is or whatever, but he said it was a place in the property where he'd like to sit and reflect, and it was just a peaceful little spot and a lovely place for him that he just liked to enjoy, kind of just sitting and sort of doing and thinking nothing. But when he came back to this spot, for some reason, he found himself experiencing like absolute dread and fear in this place, and couldn't bring himself to stay there for more than a few seconds because he felt like something terrible was going to happen. So he just had to get out of there.
In the cabin. The cabin.
Somewhere on the property in the cabin. Like I said, he doesn't, from what I read, it doesn't describe where this place was, but he had some little place around the property of the cabin that was like his little sanctuary place, but for whatever reason it was now fucked and he couldn't stay there, and he just felt like just this dread, this fear like come over him during this time when he would be there. And so I thought this was funny. This is very Hunter S. Thompson. He couldn't bring himself to return to the spot until years later when he demolished the area with gunfire and profanity. So apparently he took an AK-47 to this place and just like started shooting the fuck out of it.
Fuck that dark spot.
Just destroying it with automatic gunfire, and just like blew it to shreds as he was like screaming like profanities at this area. And it reminded me of that. Well, I experienced it myself, like standing up to that fear, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like finding that fear that's being fed off you, standing up to it, or finding that sort of either higher power or whatever you want to cling to during that time to basically fight back against the fear. And from that moment on, he felt totally at peace in that area. It was just like he had to face it and fight it, you know?
Yeah.
So there was some sort of like profound, oddly traumatic thing that happened to him, I guess, during this time. Otherwise, you know, why would he feel that fear in that place, you know? Mm-hmm. You know, after he shot it to pieces, which is fucking awesome.
Yeah, it just reminds me. Yeah, that's so cool.
So he doesn't remember anything. He just woke up. No. He has no recollection of what might have happened to him at all. Just that there's a dark spot and he needed to get rid of it. That's it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's all he remembers from that whole time. So at this point, I'm like, as I'm reading this, I'm like, was he just like tripping balls on LSD and like this is a crazy story? But here's the thing. So later on, years after this, I guess they were having a party at this cabin area. A bunch of friends came around, and one of his good friends also had a very similar encounter as he was walking down to the outhouse during this party, where his friend had seen this glowing little man that he described as raccoon-like, but he described as a little man as well, which is odd. Yeah. So it must have been like standing up on all fours, I don't know, on his way to the outhouse. And it freaked him out. And I guess the raccoon grew to, as he was watching it, grew to like a full man size and spoke to him and said something like, "I'll see you tomorrow." And this guy just freaked out, and I ran back to the cabin, jumped in his car, and just fucked off, and he was done. And after this, Mullis asked this guy, like, what happened? And I guess he told him the story, like, you're going to think I'm crazy, but here's what happened. And obviously Mullis was like, oh, yeah, I saw a similar thing.
That's weird. It's almost like what is an alien, right? It's just not human, but it's like an interdimensional being.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Like, I would want to know what happened to him. It's not like he got sucked to a ship.
Beings they can like form to whatever our perception is. So maybe whatever this was like, I'll just be a friendly raccoon to this guy. He'll talk to me.
Right. Maybe he was a Guardians of the Galaxy fan. Anyway,
hey, furry guy, you want some food? Zap.
So obviously, there is something crazy here, unless this party was just like a big LSD, keys in the bowl fest. But his daughter, who was a grown adult at the time, also experienced some missing time at this place as well. So later on, his daughter